Hi, this video is going to be about using and not abusing sources. You notice that this week I had you look at three different sources. First, I had you skim chapter 5 and look for kinds of evidence that you could possibly use in your paper. Then I had you read The Art of Quoting, which is from the book They Say, I Say by Gerald Graff and Kathy Birkenstein, and this book really focuses on why and how we quote. And then finally, I had you read Appendix 2 because this gets into the nitty-gritty of quoting, all the little details, all the little rules you need to know. And because Appendix 2 has so much information in it, I wanted to just take this opportunity to do a presentation on the highlights from Appendix 2, things I really want you to make sure that you know and remember to use in your paper. So, first of all, let's look at the very beginning of Appendix 2. On page 278, it talks about something called reading rhetorically. Basically, this is summed up by Gerald Graff and Kathy Birkenstein as They Say, I Say. You want to ask yourself two questions. First of all, what did they say? And why did they say it? As you're reading something, you want to be thinking about who this author is. What are they saying? Why are they saying it? Who's their audience? What's their major point? Once you know that, then you can ask yourself the second question. What does what they say, how does what they say fit into what I want to say? And what I love in your book is that they have this table on page 278 that covers this really nicely. You can see that I wrote in my book, they say and I say. And that's really how I see these two columns. These are the questions that you want to be asking yourself as you're reading over here. And then as you're writing, you want to come and ask yourself these questions so that you make sure that you're really reading rhetorically and you're thinking about what the author is saying and then how it's going to fit with your own voice and your side of the story. So, great thing to check out. Once you've got the reading rhetorically part down, another thing to really think about that's important in Appendix 2 is purposeful note-taking. I really like the quote on page 279 that describes good note-taking. It says, good note-taking includes recording bibliographic information for each source. That's basically the citation. Recording information and ideas from each source, so like a summary and quotations from the source, and then responding to each source with your own ideas and exploratory writing. Now, this should sound familiar, right? Yep, it's the research journal. Think about it for just a second. If we look back at here, what I had you do in the research journal, cite your source, record a short summary of the source, pick out some quotes, and then put your own thoughts in there. The reason why I had you do that is because in the long run, it'll save you time because you won't have to go back and reread an entire source to remember why it was interesting to you, what stuck out to you, what the basic idea of the source was, and more importantly, it'll help you to avoid plagiarism because you'll have those direct quotes set apart from what you thought and what you said, so you'll be able to clearly identify what they said and what you said. So, let's look also at this graph right here. This is another table actually from page 280 in your book, and it gives you some more strategies for note taking. What I really like is this first column, function that the source might play in your argument. If you're thinking about these things, how you can use different sources in your argument to provide background, to provide an alternative view, these are the kinds of things that you want to be looking for as you're researching to help you support your source. So this is also a great table to look at. All right, so once you've taken some notes, you've thought about what they say, you've thought about what you want to say, you also want to make sure that you take some time to evaluate the sources. And there are 4 ways to do that. Number 1, you want to be thinking about reliability. This is basically accuracy. You really want to watch out for web pages because they're not always fact-checked. Credibility is the next one. You want to make sure there's no fallacies in what this person is saying. And fortunately, because we've been talking about those, you hopefully know how to identify them. Next, you want to be thinking about their angle of vision. You know, what do they believe in value? Can you tell where this author is coming from? Sometimes that's obvious in the article, but sometimes you also need to do a little research on that author and find a little bit about their background. Are they a professor? Are they a journalist? Are they just some guy who writes a blog in his living room? You know, make sure you know where their angle of vision is coming from. And also degree of advocacy. Who do they work for? You know, is it clear that they're working for one political party or one special nonprofit organization? One obvious way to check a degree of advocacy is to look at something like a political cartoon because it's really obvious. This cartoon is clearly advocating the idea that the Republicans cater to the rich and leave out the middle class and the poor. It's very biased, but it's a political cartoon, and we expect that. So if you're going to cite this in your paper, acknowledging, hey, this is a political cartoon, this is a commentary on American society, then your audience knows what to expect. You wouldn't, of course, want to cite this as, this is the facts, this is exactly how it is. So it's important to know what kind of source you have and how it's being used. So we've talked about all these different sources for evaluating your source. We've given an example. Next thing we want to look at is how to actually integrate that quote or that idea into your paper. And there are 3 different ways to do it. First of all, you can just summarize the entire source. Now, summarizing an entire source doesn't mean that you basically rewrite the entire source. You want to be really brief and to the point. So-and-so argues this. This is basically their main idea. The next thing that you can do is paraphrase. This is where you take some ideas or facts or statistics from a source and you just kind of paraphrase them, put them into your own words, and put them into your paper. The thing you have to be super careful of is that you don't patch write. And we'll talk about what that is in just a minute. And then finally, there's the direct quote where you take exactly what they said, you put it in quotation marks, and you put it in your paper. There are some special rules for using names and punctuation with that, which we'll also talk about. So, as you're thinking about these 3 different strategies, let's do some close-ups on what that looks like in your book. The first page that I really like in your book is page 284. And basically it kind of contrasts 2 different strategies. The top one is a summary of information from a source. And you'll notice that it's advocating vegetarianism. So they're using the information to make an argument for vegetarianism. What's interesting to me is that you can use the exact same source and do just the opposite, which is what they're doing down here, looking skeptically at vegetarianism. Instead of summarizing the source, they're actually paraphrasing down here. But it's important to know that you can use the same source to say different things, and so how you interpret the source is very important. Here you can tell the author has their claim here that vegetarianism is a good thing. They are careful to say where their source is coming from, and then they they summarize just the main, top highlighting things that show that vegetarianism is a healthy kind of lifestyle. The bottom quotation example down here, or paraphrasing example actually, again, very similar thing. They have their claim at the beginning that vegetarianism isn't all that it's cracked up to be necessarily, that we should be a little bit skeptical about it. They again are careful. All the blue is where they're saying where the source, where the information is coming from in the source, and then they're paraphrasing some of that information again to go along with what they say. And what I really like about this is at the bottom they take time to summarize their entire point and really bring it home. In short, they, meaning vegetarians, live longer because they take better care of themselves, not because they avoid meat. By adding that I say thing at the end, then it's really clear this is what this author is taking from this information. So page 284, again, just great examples for how to integrate quotes and how to use the same information to support your own argument, regardless of what side of the issue that you're on. The next page that you want to look at is page 286. Again, this is where it talks about patch writing, the thing that you want to avoid at all costs. So basically, what patch writing is it's where you cite your source. I mean, you still say where it comes from, but you use direct quotations, direct word choice from that original source without putting it in quotes. All this red part here and here, that should actually be in quotes because it comes from the original source. Those are exact phrases from that original source. They have to be in quotes. Otherwise, you significantly have to change the word choice and the sentence structure and put it in your own words. So if you're needing more information on patch writing, there's a couple more examples on page 286, and I definitely encourage you to check those out. Next thing to look at is the punctuation. If you're quoting directly from the source and you're not patch writing, you're being very careful to exactly quote what came from the source, there's some rules for that. You'll notice that there's the attributive tag, which is again just saying where the source came from according to the American Council on Science and Health. Then you put a comma here to offset, say I'm ready to set up my quote. Then you put the quotation marks to say this is a direct quote. There's a capital M because you're quoting the entire sentence. So you go ahead and stick in the capital M here. What's interesting is at the very end, you'll notice this is where the quote ends. So there's the quotation marks, but there's not a period. The period actually comes after the citation that tells you what page number it came from. It's really important to remember, something that a lot of students honestly forget. But remember, period doesn't go here, it goes after the citation if you have a page number. Now, if you don't have a page number, then you go ahead and put it inside of the quotations right there. And there's an example of that actually over here. So this is where you're not quoting an entire sentence, but maybe just pieces from a sentence. Notice that they're still, even though they're not quoting a huge long phrase, they're just using the phrase non-dietary factors, they're still putting that in quotes because it came from directly from that source. Health conscious is another word choice item that they pulled directly from the source, so they put it in quotes. And then finally here at the end, they're setting up the sentence in their own words and then ending with the rest, so they don't start with a capital letter here, and then they finish off the sentence again with the period after the page number. So again, this is page 288 in your textbook. If you need more help with quotations or how to insert quotations, definitely go back and look at these pages. Next thing I want to point out really quickly is where you put the source. Generally, it is preferred for you to state your source up front. And this is part of just establishing authority, credibility with your source. There are a few times, however, when you'll want to put your source at the end. You give the information and then you just put the information in parentheses. You might do that if you're just citing a website, for instance. You're not citing, somebody like the American Council on Science and Health, who's a very credible source. If you don't have a clear author or you don't have a really strong source, you might just put it in parentheses afterwards. But for the most part, if you want to establish authority, if you want to establish this is a credible source, this is a really good source that you would trust, then you go ahead and say that up front and let your readers know where that information is going to come from. So, summarizing, paraphrasing, quoting directly, all great things to use. The next thing that you need to know, of course, is avoiding plagiarism. And basically, you can do that very easily if you take careful notes and you do what we just talked about. Summarize, paraphrase, and quote the right way. There is a table in your book on page 290 that talks about kind of like the different areas of plagiarism. This would be like the green light area. This is how you know you're totally good. This is the red light area. This is where you've been completely dishonest. But most people, if they get in trouble, they're right here in the middle. They either, get in trouble with patch writing, they're not taking careful notes so they don't keep track of their sources, or they just generally misunderstand how to do academic writing. If you do have any questions on plagiarism, please ask. But in general, follow the guidelines in your book and just your gut instinct. If it doesn't feel like you're being completely honest, then you probably need to be careful and make sure that you're citing that information more carefully. All right, citations. This is the last thing that it mentions in Appendix 2, and it briefly gives a couple pages on MLA and APA. Please keep in mind that you only have to use one of these forms of citation in your book. And at the very end, when you list all the sources that you used in your paper, if you're using MLA citations, you're going to have what's called a works cited page. If you're doing APA, you're going to have a references page. These pages are very similar. They're a separate page from the rest of the essay. They're on their own page. All the sources should be in alphabetical order. All the sources should have hanging indents, which it'll show you what that looks like in your book if you look on these pages. And basically, one thing that saves me a lot of time when I'm doing citations is when I get my sources, knowing some of the tricks for how to find citations easily. Obviously, the OWL Purdue website is your top source for checking and making sure your citations are accurate, but I just wanted to show you, if you go to the library homepage, one thing that I like to do when I search is go into articles and databases, and I look for G for Google Scholar. I go through the library webpage because a lot more PDFs will come up when I do a search, and let's say I'm doing robotics and education. That's what I'm doing a lot of research on right now, actually. And I find, wow, there's some good sources. Down here, if you look over here, this shows that there's a PDF link right to this source, so I can go ahead and just click on that and the source will be, bam, right there on my page. But the thing I love most about Google Scholar is this little button right here. See where it says Cite? If I click on that, bam, I've got the source right there, the entire citation. Now, it's important to note that this citation is not always 100% correct. Like for instance, in MLA, you should also have the medium of publication at the end. So if this is an article, it should say print. Usually they leave it off of here in Google Scholar because they let you decide if you want to cite it as a web source or a print source. The original source is a print source, so it's totally fine to say that, but some people prefer to put web source. Either way, you just need to make sure that you add that on to the end. And it's important to always check these citations with the information on Al-Purdue. But generally, you can just copy and paste this right into your notes and then right into your works cited page and be pretty good to go. Another great thing about this source is this lovely little button called Cited By. So let's say I look at this article right here, Children in Robotics and Education, and I think, wow, this is a great source. It's exactly what I'm looking for. I'd like to find other sources like it. I can look here at related articles, but I can also click this button and get more recent articles that were written by people who cited this, who used the same information and added on their own research to it. And so if I click on that, now I have more articles, and as you can see, they're all much more recent, which if you're doing something in the sciences or social sciences, usually more current sources are better. So that's a little tip for finding some of those sources. Let's go ahead and jump back to Prezi though. Here we are back at the, don't forget to go to the library website. Also, there are a lot of other search engines which are great on the library website. In fact, if you're having trouble finding a source, please email Pam, our librarian, because she knows those search engines inside and out, and she can really help you. All right. Finally, just wanted to remind you that I also cite my sources. These are the sources for this presentation. Really encourage you especially to go back to your book to get information and reminders for the things that we learned. And finally, I want you to remember this. Never forget, what they say must always be connected to what you say. The whole point of quoting in your paper is to use these other sources, these other voices to back up what you say, to connect them. You don't want to have any kind of confusion between the ideas that you're putting in your source and how it's connected to what you say. So don't forget to add those interpretations, those analysis statements that let the reader know this is why this source connects to my argument. This is how it supports my argument. This is how it's going to help you to understand and even maybe believe that what I'm telling you is right. So those are the things to remember: using and not abusing sources. If you have any more questions, please let me know.